Good evening. I think it's already been a long evening, fun, but long, and I think there are several others who are speaking after me. So I will keep it very brief because luckily the judge who spoke before me painted an entirely wonderful backdrop to what I'm about to say. So I'm her sequel, and part one has already been told. Like all of us here, I feel like our lives have been divided, much like BC AD, into two huge segments, before October 7th and since. So much of what I'm about to say may not have been what I would have said had I been invited to speak 8 weeks ago. So this is all against the backdrop of this new life in a new century, in a new time, which is very different from all the other times we've lived in. I want to pick up on the themes that the previous speaker began to speak about the revolution in Iran. But the reason I think it's very important to keep the details of the Iranian revolution very much in focus right now, and I speak about it relatively at length in a recent piece I wrote for The Atlantic, the magazine, and my piece ran a few days ago, has to do with the fact that I think in some ways everything that happened in Iran in 1979 is incredibly relevant and important today. And I think drawing those details from the events in Iran can be hugely insightful and informative to Western audiences, not just for the sake of the Jews, but for the sake of the Western societies that are unaware of the threat of Islamism through which we have lived. Now, there were two speeches in the past few weeks given by first-generation Iranian Americans, one in Washington at the march, and the other at a Senate hearing. And I think what I would like to emphasize, not simply in the interest of what we just heard is hugely important, which is an emphasis on the rule of law and a commitment as a result to facts and evidence. It's that I think telling the story of what happened to the Jewish community in Iran in the broader context of what happened to Iran is very important. First and foremost, what happened to the Jewish community in Iran is not similar to what happened to, say, the Jewish community in Germany. And I think we need to bear in mind that as Jews, we don't need to streamline our stories in order to belong. To belong to each other and to be part of a same community. We can have our own distinct narratives and yet piece together, be part of a larger community by virtue of our history, by virtue of the shared tradition that we have and a common culture that we have. So I say this because part of those speeches that we have heard in the past few weeks have singularly emphasized the discrimination that Jews suffered in Iran in the aftermath of 1979 revolution. Jews did suffer a great deal after the 1979 revolution in Iran, but they were not singled out. In fact, among the religious minorities that suffered in Iran in the aftermath of the 1979 revolution, the Baha'i community suffered far worse and continues to suffer far worse than the Jewish community does. Now, this may seem like I am undermining the Jewish argument for the anti-Semitism that the Iranian regime exercises. To the contrary, what I'm trying to emphasize is the ideological agenda that the Iranian regime has that is not simply focused on the Jews. So it may begin with the Jews, it may begin with one religious group, but it has never been from the start to this day limited to only Jews or the Jewish community. If we need to be, in order to protect our democracy, we need to be dedicated to the law, to upholding the rule of law. We need to be just as dedicated to upholding the facts, upholding the truth, because the truth will lead us to a much larger truth, which is Iran was a political laboratory for an experiment that the Iranian regime conducted in 1979. In April of 1979, there was a referendum in Iran that put to the public a choice. Islamic Republic of Iran, yes or no? Over 95% of all Iranians in 1979 voted yes in that referendum. 44 years later, the people of Iran realized that that decision was to their detriment and that the quality of life, their economy, and so much else about their lives they have all simply plummeted. And if Iranians could do over something, it would be to hold another referendum and to redo that decision again. Now, and that is why when you look at the voices that are coming from the region, from the Middle East, in objection to Israel, in objection to the war, in support of Hamas, it's not the voice that you hear from the youth of Iran today. Why? Because they lived through the political experiment for the past 40 years, and they recognize that Islamism is not only a threat to a small group of people, it's a threat that they have lived through, and it's a threat that has a pan-Islamist agenda for the entire region, including the Palestinians, Israel, and elsewhere. It is important to be able to say that Jews were not singled out during 1979 Iranian Revolution, but like many others in Iran, they lost quality of life, they were discriminated against, but others were too, and that is because the Iranian regime had one group of people to whom it was committed, which was Shiite Muslims that declared solidarity with it, and then everyone else. And those everyone else included women who didn't want to go under the hijab, secular Muslims who didn't want to be practicing Shiites, and a lot of other minority groups, religious minorities and gender minorities and others. Accentuating, highlighting this shift enables us to see that the government of Iran, the regime in Iran, has had an agenda that was anti-Israel, was anti-Jewish, but ultimately was anti-imperialist and anti-West. And if we allow Hamas or groups like Hamas to thrive, we are dooming a civilization that we have all worked so hard to build. And in case I went through this too quickly, I want to say that if you all have some time and like me are on social media, please go look up how the Iranian youth have been reacting over the past 6 weeks, 7 weeks to the events in Israel. Many of them, especially those in Iran, are supportive of Israel. In fact, in one particular clip that's available online, and I used it as a reference in my piece for The Atlantic, there's a large soccer stadium in Iran where a flag of Palestine is raised, and everybody in the stadium starts to chant, "Shove the flag, bum, ba, bum, ba, bum. Shove the flag, bum, ba, bum, ba, bum." And this isn't one or two or three or four people. This is a stadium full of thousands of spectators. We have to, as much as we have to emphasize the story of Jews in Iran, we also need to emphasize the story of seculars in Iran and the story of this huge transformation that has gone, just like our story, unknown. They hate Islamism more than anyone, and they have been trying for the past 20 years to change this trend, to overthrow the regime, but they just haven't been able to gather the necessary forces to do so. One last point that I think is really important to make is this. One of the first speakers talked about the United Nations and how the United Nations has never recognized the suffering of Jews from the Middle East, and obviously 2 days ago there was the Day of Violence against condemnation of violence against women. No talk about the Israeli women who have been subject to rape, or other groups that are failing to recognize, or as another speaker said, we're losing the PR war. I'd like to propose something else. We should win the PR war if we can. We should try to bring wisdom to the UN. However, I would like to propose that our first commitment should be to ourselves. Our first commitment should be to lift ourselves, to thrive individually and thrive as a community. There's only so much we can do to bring awareness, and there's only so much we can do by way of trying to win hearts and minds of others. But the reason we have been hated throughout the century, or at least one of the several reasons that we've been hated, is that we have been successful. And one of my recently discovered and favorite philosophers, who happens to be a Black African-American thinker, is Thomas Sowell, who in an interview, when he was asked why Jews are hated so much and what can they do to avoid this hatred, simply said, fail, right? I would like to propose that we should continue to talk to others, to the UN, win the PR war, but our first commitment throughout the history has always been to our own community, to lifting each other and lifting ourselves. And that has been the secret to our continuity and to our thriving. So here's to our thriving and to our continuity. Thank you.